This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the April monthly partnership meeting of the Southeast and Caribbean Disaster Resilience Partnership, or SCDRP for short. A very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Heather McCarthy. I have the honor and pleasure of serving as the Executive Director of SCDRP. And for this very special meeting during Earth Week 2025, we have a dynamite panel discussion for you this morning. So thank you so much for joining us today. And this is our agenda for today. Who's excited for the summer? Here at SCDRP, we are. And for our first agenda item today, we have some summer highlights to tell you about. Next, special announcements related to our 2026 SCDRP annual meeting, which will mark the 10th anniversary of SCDRP. And then I will introduce today's 4 panelists from North Carolina. Brian Byfield from the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resilience, Adam Stein from NOAA Office for Coastal Management, Dr. Mary Roderick from the Land of Sky Regional Council, and Drew Christy from GROW NC at the North Carolina Governor's Office. After an interactive question and answer session, we will use our remaining minutes for partner sharing. So please be ready to share your announcements from around the Southeast and Caribbean. So exciting announcement here. The weather is heating up and so are we. We are bringing back the SCDRP Partner Picks Summer Speaker Series. So SCDRP partners, you get to pick our summer speakers. So during the months of June, July, and August, SCDRP will be showcasing speakers of your choice. And from whom would you like to hear an update? What topics would you like to learn more about right now? So you can suggest a person, an organization, company, group, professional sector, a hot topic, or even a geographic region that you'd like to hear more from. So please follow this QR code, the tropical one, to suggest your speakers. If you are not able to use Google Forms, then email us your speaker recommendations at scdrp@socorro.org. And yes, you can nominate yourself as a speaker. So we look forward to hearing from you right away. In fact, this is a great time. Go ahead and scan that QR code. We want to get our Partner Picks speakers lined up. Next, as an organization, I have an important SCDRP announcement. You will watch as we undergo an exciting staff transition this summer. After an amazing 3 years, I will be stepping down from my role as SCDRP Executive Director at the end of June. But no worries, our amazing partnership is strong, has a plan, and will be in great hands. Let's all give a very warm congratulations to Claire McGrath, whom you all have met. She will be rising from SCDRP Program Coordinator to Director on July 1st this summer. So over the next 2 months, you will be hearing from and seeing more of Claire during our meetings as we prepare for a seamless transition on July 1st. And with that announcement, I will now hand it over to Claire for a few more SCDRP announcements. Claire.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather. First of all, I just want to briefly say how excited and honored I am to serve as the SCDRP director following Heather's transition. As you all know, Heather has done so much to build SCDRP, expanding membership, growing the annual meeting, starting new initiatives over the last 3 years that she's served as director. So I know that I have very big shoes to fill, but thankfully Heather has prepared me very well to take the reins thanks to her great leadership and training. And I really look forward to continuing SCDRP's trajectory of growth and serving you all. So I am excited to announce that this summer we will be offering a group mentorship series featuring several of our advisory board members, including Brian Byfield, who you will be hearing from today. This is going to be an excellent opportunity for students, rising resilience leaders, and professionals new to the field to learn from experienced leaders about how they got to where they are today, and some of their insights on the future of the field of resilience. We'll be sharing more information in the coming weeks. And if you'd like to receive direct updates about this series, or if you're interested in joining our fall mentorship cohort, either as a mentor or a mentee, please email us at scdrp@socorro.org, and we'll make sure that you are up to date. Next, we are looking for a host institution for the SCDRP 10th anniversary meeting. So it's a big milestone for SCDRP. And in order to ensure that we're able to have a 10th annual meeting, we really need an institution to host the meeting, help us plan some sessions, and help us plan a field trip. We typically hold the meeting in late January or early February. This will be 2026. And we would really like to confirm the location by July 1st, 2025, so we can hit the ground running with some planning. So please email us, scdrp@socorro.org, to learn more about our parameters and some of the needs. Thank you so much for considering us. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Heather.
Thanks, Claire. Thank you. We love Claire, and we're excited for her to rise to this as director of SCDRP, and we know she will continue to move the important initiatives forward. Big congratulations to her. So now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce the esteemed panelists that you will be hearing from today. First, Brian Byfield. Wave, Brian. He's the Resilient Communities Program Manager in the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency within the North Carolina Department of Public Safety. Brian serves SCDRP as an advisory board member representing the state of North Carolina and as the chair of the SCDRP Partnership Committee. Next, Adam Stein. Wave, Adam. Adam is the lead of the Learning Services Division in the NOAA Office for Coastal Management, and Adam also has been serving as the NOAA advisor for North Carolina Helene Interagency Recovery Coordination. Next, Dr. Mary Roderick. Mary Waith, there you are, is the Planning Director of the Economic and Community Development Department within the Land of Sky Regional Council. And Drew Christy. Drew, give a wave, is the Associate Director of Governmental Relations for GROW NC, which stands for the Governor's Recovery Office for Western North Carolina. And please see our most recent SCDRP newsletter for each of the panelists' complete biographies. So Brian, Adam, Mary, and Drew, a very warm SCDRP welcome. A sincere thank you to each of you for carving out time to share with us today. Thank you, Brian, for your continuous commitment to regional collaboration through SCDRP and for serving as our panel organizer and moderator today. Brian, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Heather. Good morning, everyone. Just want to say initial thank you to Alyssa for coming up with the idea for this presentation, reaching out to Adam and Adam's thoughts and ideas, and we have evolved to this presentation. So we're going to go through everyone, just a few minutes with everyone, sharing their perspectives on what's happening in Western North Carolina post Hurricane Helene and thinking about long-term resiliency. So let me begin. Heather, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so just sort of big broad background for me here. You will see that between 1980 and 2025, there have been 85 storms or tropical cyclones that have impacted North Carolina, and over 90% of the cost of fixing those. If you do the quick math, it's roughly one event every 6 months. And when you think about the sheer impact on people's lives, the cost, and what that means for retarding growth and development, it's important that we think about long-term resiliency. Next slide. And I just want to, as we go through, okay, yeah, just some quick things about Helene as a background before I ask Adam to step in and share his thoughts. You know, Helene impacted North Carolina, but many states beyond that, literally all the states in SCDRP's region, and we had significant loss of life. So I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge those two things about the hurricane, but also to note that what we had was a confluence of two weather systems in a very mountainous geography and in a region that's not used to having this kind of tropical rainfall. So that brought its own sorts of nuances to the situation. The hurricane impacted over 40% of the state's population, impacted 45% of the state's GDP. We have a very natural resource-based economy in Western North Carolina, and to see that damage was pretty stark. You know, I mentioned the number of storms that have happened since 1980, but if you see there, most of them have occurred since 2000. The damage from this storm is 3.5 times what happened to Hurricane Florence in 2018. So how many fold has the cost increased over the short space of 7 years? And what does that mean for the long-term impacts on Western North Carolina and the state in general? I'll ask Adam to then share his thoughts on Helene and what's happening, to take us his perspective on that. So Adam, all yours.
Hey, thanks, Brian. And great to be here. Thank you, Heather, for all your service to the SCDRP in the region. And congratulations to Claire. Yeah. And thanks to the entire advisory board, and Deborah and Socorro, who continue to keep the canoe moving forward. So thanks, Brian, too, for the invitation to join the conversation today. I'm glad to be back with this group after being away for a while, and looking forward to providing some federal perspective on long-term resilience planning through this recovery effort. As Heather and Brian mentioned in my intro, one of my current roles is serving as the NOAA advisor to the interagency coordination effort for Western North Carolina. So in this role, I work with federal, state, and local agencies and other organizations to bring NOAA capabilities to bear, and in particular with an eye towards promoting resilience to future storms. I'm also a resident of Asheville, and so I went through this storm with Mary and the rest of our communities. And I can tell you from 20 years of experience supporting coastal disasters, I never imagined that I would find myself supporting hurricane recovery efforts with impacts of this magnitude in Western North Carolina. I'm going to come back to that lack of imagination in just a moment. I also just want to mention that none of my comments today should be considered as any sort of official position or policy. These are just my observations as it relates to what I'm seeing here. So one of the first things that I've noticed in regards to resilience and long-term planning has been that those communities that did invest in resilience planning efforts prior to Helene, either as standalone resilience planning efforts or as forward-looking planning efforts within other planning activities like comprehensive economic development strategies or comprehensive plans, those jurisdictions seem to be much better positioned right now to take advantage of the opportunities to address those risks and vulnerabilities and promote resilience through their long-term recovery planning efforts. That's probably not a surprise to many of you, but there were only a handful of communities with these types of forward-looking resilience plans that were in place prior to the storm. So while we won't know how these communities fare in accomplishing their outcomes, I think it's reasonable for us to assume that future storms in these places will be significantly less destructive and expensive. This return on investment has been highlighted by many institutions and agencies over the years, but there's some recent work done by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that identified that every dollar spent on preparedness provides a $13 return on investment in terms of costs on damages and cleanup. And I'll drop a link in the chat, concluding my remarks with that report. So for me, this return raises the stakes and highlights the opportunity that long-term recovery planning provides to buy down the cost of future storms. While there are only, as I mentioned, only a handful of communities that are beginning to undertake long-term recovery planning efforts now, I expect that number will grow significantly in the coming weeks as the debris missions continue to wrap up and the federal and state agencies continue hosting long-term recovery workshops in partnership with regional councils of government and regional commissions. I think the other observation I wanted to share is that as individuals here, I think most of us, including myself, were really limited by our own imagination when it came to preparing for what could happen in our region from a sequence of storms like we had in December. This lack of imagination is a really well-known challenge in crisis management. It's researched extensively, but I think it is rarely operationalized. And so the concern is that if we don't expand our imagination, we may focus narrowly on addressing specific recovery needs outside of the broader context. And unfortunately, with that narrow view, we may miss opportunities to accomplish mutual objectives from other sectors, and we could even inadvertently lead to unintended negative consequences. But I will tell you that I am incredibly hopeful and inspired by some of the conversations that I'm hearing more recently. There seems to be a lot of appetite for innovation and creativity. Agencies and organizations are working across silos, and I think that I'm seeing jurisdictions more willing to work collaboratively at the regional scale. And that's really encouraging to me. So this raises questions for me about how we're going to collectively meet the anticipated demand for technical and planning assistance. You know, FEMA has dedicated planners to support a handful of communities that are ready to begin long-term recovery planning. More will be needed. EDA has provided some financial support to support those councils of government and regional commissions, as they are vital to long-term recovery planning efforts, especially in our more rural counties and smaller municipalities. There's a number of excellent guidance documents, a bunch of which are on the SCDRP website and organized really well. And there are other federal agencies that are ready to deliver additional support in coming months as additional funding comes online. So I think I'll stop there and kick it back to you, Brian.
Thank you, Adam, for sharing those thoughts and perspectives and asking us to open up our minds to new opportunities and possibilities as we go forward. Because as the data has shown, those that plan are doing better than those that didn't in terms of resiliency and so on. So next, I will ask Drew Christy from the governor's office to share from the state, the largest state perspective, what is happening in Western North Carolina as it relates to the hurricane recovery.
Thank you, Brian. Again, I'm Drew Christy with GROW&C, which stands for the Governor's Recovery Office of Western North Carolina. I am based in Asheville. I'm a Buncombe County native. Buncombe County is Asheville's the county seat of Buncombe County. And, you know, I just like Adam, you know, and Mary, we all lived through this. It was, you know, that first week after the storm, I was sitting in the Asheville Mall parking lot working 16 hours a day. That was the only place I'd get cell signal because we had no power, no internet, no water, no anything. So it was quite challenging. And so on day one of Governor Stein's administration, he created Grow NC, which, and I'll cover kind of what Grow NC covers here in a minute. But we are kind of the front line for information gathering, data gathering, and trying to cut through the red tape of some of the state bureaucratic holdups. And so, as you can see on this slide, it's just kind of a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about today. Next slide, please, Heather. So here's kind of a breakdown of some of the, devastation that Helene caused in North Carolina. Unfortunately, we have lost 107 people due to this storm. And as Brian pointed out, this is the most devastating storm in the state's history, at a proposed estimate of 59 or almost $60 billion worth of economic damage. And as we all know, Helene was the most devastating storm to the U.S. since Katrina. But in North Carolina, approximately 74,000 homes were damaged. 5,000 miles of state-maintained roads were severely impacted. Currently, I think we're at 92% completion of those roads. And the biggest milestone was I-40 connecting Tennessee to North Carolina. That got completely washed away and was closed down for nearly 6 months. And now, instead of being 4 lanes, 2 lanes eastbound, 2 lanes westbound, we have 1 lane eastbound and 1 lane westbound. So we're making progress on I-40. And that's a major thoroughfare for, trucks and transportation as well as visitors to the state. 7,000 private roads and bridges were destroyed, and 50 million cubic yards of debris. And that number keeps going up because as we get into the more mountainous, inaccessible areas, there's a lot of debris laying there, and we're worried about wildfires, which is a big, big issue currently. We've had, I think, 5,000 acres currently have burned in the state of North Carolina, and majority of that has been in the West, and it's all due to the debris that's just sitting in these inaccessible forest areas. Next slide, please. And so here's kind of a better breakdown of some of that $59 billion of estimated damages. And as you can see, the top 4 or the 84% come from, or 82% come from 4 regions: the economy, housing, transportation, utilities. Next slide, please. So Governor Stein has a clear vision for the recovery of this storm, to make communities safer, make communities stronger than before, and have a quicker response time and recovery time for both this storm and future storms. Next slide, please. And so here's kind of a breakdown of what Grow NC actually does. We have currently 12 members on our team. We are based inside the governor's office. And so our main focus is not to execute programs, but to figure out ways that these programs can be implemented faster, and also data gathering and information gathering. And again, myself and my colleague who's up in Boone, up in the high country, we are the physical boots on the ground. So we're meeting with local officials, we're meeting with community members, we're meeting with residents impacted and hearing their stories and figuring out ways that we can help them recover. Next slide, please. So on March 19th, the legislature passed House Bill 47, and then a few hours later, Governor Stein signed that bill, which helps with recovery. It's $524 million worth of state funding for recovery. Next slide, please. And as you can see here, this kind of breakdown of what that $524 million covers. $200 million for farm recovery and crop loss, $120 million for home building and repairs. And on a ancillary note, on the federal government side, the state has submitted to HUD their application for $1.4 billion in HUD funding. And we are the first in the nation for this cycle to get that submitted. And it's the quickest that any state or local entity has submitted their HUD application to the feds, I think since Superstorm Sandy. So we want to make sure that we're front of the line, that we can get access to that $1.4 billion for housing, or from housing and urban development. I'll cover the private roads and bridges here in a minute. There is $55 million for small business infrastructure grants. Governor Stein has been pushing hard for small business grants directly to small business owners. The legislature decided to put this in small business infrastructure grants. So counties and municipalities would be able to apply for these grants to repair, physical buildings or water or wastewater pipes into these buildings. So again, the governor is still pushing for physical small business grants to help out small business owners themselves, but as of yet, we have not made any movement with the legislature. But the legislature did preface this, and as you can see on the slide, this is part one, and the legislature has made this a priority, that this was not the only funding that they're going to produce for recovery efforts. Next slide, please. And here's the state has allocated $100 million for private roads and bridges. Again, we've had over 7,000 private roads and bridges destroyed throughout the region, and so the state is using that $100 million, and we've created an online portal in which individual residents can submit their claims to the state, and the state is collecting all that data and going through it, and obviously prioritizing residents that have medical needs, that cannot get emergency services to their house, low income residents, and we're going through that. But $100 million is just a drop in the bucket for that 7,000 private roads and bridges. But we have created an online portal in which residents can submit their claims for damages. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll turn it back over, and I'll put my email in the chat, but here's my email as well. And also, GrowNC has a website. It's wncrecovery.nc.gov, and it has our public-facing dashboard in which people are able to see the amount of damages done, what's been completed, things like that. With that, I'll turn it back over. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Drew, for the update of what's happening from the state's end at the larger scale. Before I hand it over to Mary to share information about our perspectives from within the planning and community in Western North Carolina, I just want to say, remember that we are taking questions, responses, suggestions, even other things that we can adopt that you have learned in your experiences, so that we can take it and use in Western North Carolina. So please remember to hold those questions or put them in the chat as we get ready to get into that part of the presentation today. So Mary, from the Land of Sky Council of Government, I think it's the most beautifully named council of government I've come across in my entire experience working with COGS. So Mary, all yours.
Yeah. So we are one of 16 councils of government, or COGS, as we're referred to across the state, and we represent 4 counties and 16 municipalities. Our region, and we use the word region very differently than you all use the word region. We're so region within North Carolina. We are the main stem of the French Broad River. So from the headwaters as it flows north into Tennessee. And I think that's important to keep in mind because there's a geographic overlap and consistency within our jurisdictional region. We also share Haywood County, the Pigeon River Basin, with our sister COG Southwestern Commission. Our NPR Transportation Planning Organization covers that. So COGs are uniquely positioned to support disaster recovery because we're already working both at the local level, like in individual jurisdictions, helping them with project funding and implementation and land use and development, as well as region-wide. I mentioned infrastructure development. We also develop transportation and mobility plans, housing, broadband, watershed planning, stormwater management, hazard mitigation. Like we're already in there, we're already doing all these projects. So we're really able, I think, to bring the site understanding of where recovery can fit into the ongoing and long-term needs that communities have already had. Very fortunately, North Carolina invested $6 million ahead of the storm in the state budget for all of the COGs to learn and then train our jurisdictions on disaster financial management. And that was largely focused on the FEMA PA program. We had just completed these trainings last summer, and we were still in the process of supporting communities and preparing the kinds of policies and procedures they should have in place, like emergency pay policies, making sure that they review their insurance, and to have really good asset inventories. We were kind of in the process of doing the things that we had trained these jurisdictions on when Helene hit. I wish, I would have never hoped for Helene, but I wish she'd given us like another year. We would have been even better prepared. But I'm very grateful for that investment by our state in our capacity for that. Lessons learned. I can talk a lot. We are directly doing FEMA PA for 9 communities across all 4 of our counties. But I'm not going to get too much in the weeds. I'm going to try to just focus on some of the lessons we've learned at multiple levels. At the jurisdiction level, certainly making sure that your insurance coverage is sufficient and that you plan for the worst. That's important that you have rental agreements in place that fully spell out who's responsible for damages, that you've documented and clarified ownership in complex situations. We have a lot of issues right now with, wanting to fix something, and that small business infrastructure grant, Drew, I think could be really helpful for us in Hot Springs, where that's a DOT road, but the town's supposed to maintain it, but there's no maintenance agreement in place. And so they want to reopen these businesses. FEMA's telling us, sorry, we're not going to help you fix that because it wasn't your responsibility. DOT is like, yeah, we're like a really long way away from fixing that sidewalk, Hot Springs, because they've got many billions of dollars of damages to deal with, already. It's not that they don't care. It's just in the level of priority that's way down here. So all of this around like ownership, responsibility, that's super important to have clarified ahead of time. And it's happening in every jurisdiction. We're coming up against things where that's not clear. And I think to Adam's point, I think it's very important to translate all of this resilience planning, because we have been doing a lot of that, into operational level decision making, like including these resilience and mitigation measures in your capital improvement plan. And looking holistically at this, rather than on a site-by-site basis. FEMA PA is only, really site-focused, and there's nothing right now to support. Well, there are like a few EDA, we have a few OSBM, we have a few other funding sources that can support us in kind of this broader planning. But, when you've got a site inspector from FEMA, they're like, well, what are your mitigation measures? And you're like, well, we need a minute to go over here and think about it. And had that been included, for example, in the CIP, and not just at a kind of higher level in the comp plan, that's great, or in a standalone resilience plan, but it really has to translate down into the things that we use to operationalize these ideas. At the regional level, I'm so grateful that we've been developing and nurturing collaborative networks and relationships well ahead of the disaster. I'm the chair of something called the French Broad River Partnership, which covers the entire French Broad River Basin in North Carolina. We have members from local, state, and federal government, nonprofits, businesses, academia, and we've been able to kind of quickly coalesce around certain concerns we have around waterway debris removal and riparian restoration needs, for example. Having that entity in place has been very helpful. And I mean, y'all are a regional collaboration at a much larger scale, so I don't need to, I think, belabor that benefit, but it's been amazing. I'm so glad that we have this entity in place, among others, of course. We really need to understand vulnerability at risk at multiple spatial scales, not just general exposure like many hazard mitigation plans capture. And we've been doing that since 2017, using the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit and Steps to Resilience with the support of NOAA staff here in Asheville to analyze and address our vulnerability and risks to flooding, wildfire, and landslides. What we're missing is the multi-hazard perspective. And we saw in Helene that these hazards do interact in very complex ways. And, with wildfire on the heel of the flooding and landslides, I think that's a gap that really needs to be addressed in the work that we've been doing. I have BRIC funding currently, still have it. It's all obligated. It didn't get taken away, thankfully, to expand our vulnerability and risk assessment to government-owned and critical infrastructure, as well as natural resources and our transportation network. We had already done residential and commercial properties. This is just something we've been working on for a long time. We've been including social vulnerability, economic impact, and future land use and climate change scenarios in our analysis as well. And we've been working with the city of Asheville to use all of this information to help them prioritize recovery projects and identify mitigation measures that go beyond that site level. So we're kind of scrambling right now to put together a methodology for doing this. And obviously, Brian, we're utilizing resources from NCORE, the Resilient Communities Planning Guide, to support us. But to your point, Adam, I am very glad that we've been working on this regional resilience assessment for so many years, and we do have a lot of data. But I think translating that into a prioritization framework for recovery is a gap that we're trying to fill right now. Finally, on the federal and state level, what I've seen is that, these entities need to be prepared to provide cash flow to local jurisdictions upfront. And DEQ was, the first state agency that did that and did it very well. NCEM has now offered that as well. These bridge loans are super important because these damages are in, the many millions and billions of dollars, and small jurisdictions like Hot Springs do not have that kind of cash flow to pay for all of that upfront. FEMA is a reimbursement-based program. Being prepared to address public and private property, right? Like the private roads and bridges Drew mentioned. That's not typically, what we do with public funding, but it's very necessary. So, having a methodology and framework in mind for how to do that beforehand is super important. And continuing to provide funding for recovery and resilience planning activities similar to disaster preparedness, hazard mitigation, and disaster financial management. We are, really NOAA's Climate Smart Communities Initiative, I think, is one of the only programs left that could support that kind of planning. And we have like the Swananoa Grassroots Alliance applying to that program for funding to help them with their recovery. And as Drew mentioned, continuing to streamline and simplify government processes and requirements, that is crucial. We see, it's always frustrating. I am government, but I get so annoyed with all the red tape. And, in a disaster, it's just like amplified, those difficulties when you're really trying to make a lot of decisions quickly and you're getting bogged down. So I'll stop with that, but I'm sure there will be much more we can say in our discussion.
Thank you, Mary. There are a lot of things you said, and I just wanted to highlight where we talk about resiliency and planning. We tend to think of infrastructure, hard, scapes and so on, but there is the financial aspect, there's the organizational aspect that we need to think about in terms of long-term resiliency planning. So Adam, did you have your hand up before I go to, okay, all right, let me just jump to the next few slides before we take questions. So why long-term resiliency planning and recovery? So as you can see, there are 3 humps in the response process to a disaster. We are somewhere now between the second and third hill here, and we're trying as an organization, the resiliency team within North Carolina, to encourage folks to think about how do we build in resilient components to improve the outcomes of the long-term recovery. We've heard that we want to do it in our CIP. We've done some of it before in other plans. How do we utilize the opportunity that this disaster has brought in terms of potential funding and the chance to rebuild and do things differently? So that's one of the things we're focusing on and trying to get communities to do. Different communities, because of their capacity or whatever other reasons, are at different stages. So even within Western North Carolina, not all municipalities are at the same stage in terms of the recovery process, and many things impact that. So next slide, please. So yeah, we've heard all of these. Why do the recovery planning? And what I want to highlight here is it improves social and economic outcomes by addressing the vulnerabilities up front. As you can see on the slide, the blue dots to the extreme right show the percentage of vulnerable populations that were affected by the storms in the Western North Carolina. They're greater than the state. They're greater than the major metropolitan areas nearby. So we have particularly vulnerable groups in these regions that are exposed to storms. And because you're more vulnerable, your impacts are going to be worse than the average population. So it's important that we build resilient recovery into those communities to reduce these long-term negative impacts and promote sustainable community development. And my last slide before questions. While not a silver bullet, we heard that it's being used. We have, as the resiliency team, spent the last 2 years developing this guide to help communities of varying sizes get through and understand the process. So you don't have to do the entire process. You can pick parts out. There are 2 pieces, a playbook of how to, and you can scan the QR code to get to both. The idea book is case studies, examples, primarily, probably 95% from within North Carolina, of any kind of project that you've thought about, thinking about, and contact information for getting to folks so that they can share their stories. How did they get it done? You can contact us to help you work through that. So again, not a silver bullet, but it is a good place to begin. And interestingly enough, this was funded by the Economic Development Administration. So it is clear that we were doing a lot of work in silos, but people are beginning to understand that without resilient planning, all facets of our life go down when things happen. I mean, I think that was probably clearly identified during COVID, and the average citizen was able to see that if a piece of the puzzle is missing, the whole puzzle falls apart. So I think we are ready for questions. Heather or Claire, anything came up in the chat that we wanted to share? Ask the panelists to jump in if the questions weren't directly asked of them.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I see a question to Mary from Kamiko Link at EPA. Mary, can you speak to the organizational aspect of working with so many groups, please?
Yeah, I had answered in the chat that that's for the French Broad River Partnership, I think was the reference. And we have a steering committee. We have 4 work groups: water quality, technical resources, business and recreation, and outreach and education, who meet bi-monthly. They're self-organizing. As new people and organizations come to the partnership, they can pick whatever work group they want to be a part of. And then the chairs of those work groups are on the steering committee so that we make sure we're kind of syncing up across all of them. But it's interesting because it's entirely volunteer. There is no funding for it. We just actually launched a Love Your Watershed campaign that I was able to staff with 205J funding, DEQ people on the call. Love Your Watershed was something we were planning to roll out ahead of Helene, with breweries and river-dependent businesses like rafters, where they're watershed ambassadors. They agree to a suite of activities regularly, and provide us an opportunity to solicit donations. And this is kind of our first effort into creating some kind of revenue stream for our entirely volunteer-based organization.
Thanks, Mary. I see another question from George Bonner. George, would you like to turn your camera on and ask your question? I'll go ahead and read it.
My question is related to standards. Obviously, there's a lot of new standards, ASCE standards related to building in the floodplain that have not been adopted by North Carolina. North Carolina building codes have not been updated for a while. And are we making investments with the current standards, or are we going with just the minimum North Carolina standards?
Drew, any because that's really something that does need to happen at the state level for us to be enabled, right? We are a Dillon law state, so the state gives every local jurisdiction the right to do something. So we need the state also with floodplain regulations to set the bar so that then local jurisdictions can implement those.
Yes, and I thought I was replying to everybody, but I replied directly to George, and because my unfamiliarity with GoToMeetings here, but there have been discussions about that, but only the legislature can change how that is operated, and so we have to wait on the North Carolina General Assembly to amend the building codes to be able to do so, to make the building codes more resilient.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add to that there's research taking place. The resiliency team is in early discussions with folks at Duke University to talk about the implications of those choices on insurability. What does that mean in the long term? Will folks continue to be insured? Will the companies pull out? What will they insure? What will they not? What amounts they will pay for particular things? And it's also a new thing to be thinking about flooding in the mountains. So we're looking into that and trying to go forward. But as Drew said, that has to be changed at the state legislative level.
Yeah. And I think Kate Morano, you had a question along those same lines concerning zoning and potential zoning changes. Kate, has your question been answered?
Yeah, I think so, but I have another one if no one else has any questions. I'm curious if there's one thing that you've learned or one piece of advice that you could give to other municipalities that is not kind of the standard, like have a plan going into it, have your recovery plan, make connections beforehand. If there's one thing that you've learned going through this experience that you could share with other folks, what that would be.
I think that is, and many of our communities do not have a recovery plan. So, and those that have been doing resilience planning haven't necessarily translated that into operational plans, right? Things the functional plans that we use. So I do think that general guidance is super important. And the other is just what I had said earlier. Clarify ownership and responsibility. That is crucial. We are running up against that constantly across multiple jurisdictions. When it is not clear, FEMA is not going to pay. And FEMA public assistance is our first line of, it's our first resource, right? That we have to fully utilize before we can tap into many of these other resources. I know they like to say resource of last resort, but in reality, PA funding to at least put things back the way they were and maybe do a little mitigation is a super important baseline that we're going to braid other funding sources into. So know who's responsible for the things and have it documented ahead of time.
Yeah, I'd like to support Mary on that. We learned a lot in Eastern North Carolina in terms of getting funding to folks, and in particular because who owns the home, who owns the land that the home sits on. Stuff has been passed down heirs property through generations, but we can't just hand the money over. There has to be a clear legal process. So having those things sorted at the municipal level is really, really vital in terms of speeding up response times and getting money forwarded. I think, Adam, I see your hand.
Thanks, Brian. I was just going to add to the response here from the panel. I think one of the things that we have seen in this region are communities that have been willing to develop pre-disaster redevelopment plans. They've done that during Blue Skies. They provide, pretty broad strategies. But I think in terms of opening our imagination to get to recovery outcomes that can be most resilient, if we can go even further and consider pre-disaster reconstruction plans, we know where these areas are going to flood far in advance. We experienced this in the French Broad River Basin in 1916. But as I mentioned earlier, operationalizing that into pre-disaster reconstruction planning, I think, is a next step that communities could begin to consider.
Yeah.
Yes, support Adam on that. Thinking outside the box during Blue Skies, thinking and being prepared, think about the things, the opportunities, the possibilities, and being ready. Heather?
Yeah, thank you all. And Brian, Adam, Mary, Drew, would you mind dropping your email addresses into the chat box in case our members come up with additional questions or would like to reach out to you later? So certainly as hurricane season 2025 fast approaches, a very, very special thank you to our panelists for bringing these important updates and lessons learned from your experiences in North Carolina. Your insights are incredibly valuable, applicable, and timely for us all. So thank you again.
And
I
thank you.
think
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share, and to the panelists for putting up with my last minute request to get on board.
Thank you, Brian, for bringing us all together. And as Claire has dropped into the chat box, this session has been recorded, so there is valuable information in it. We will upload to our SCDRP YouTube channel afterwards, and you can share across your networks. At this time, I think I'm going to skip partner sharing, but as always, we'd love to hear from you. What's going on in our region? Announcements, additional resources, updates, maybe some resources that have been shared today by our speakers. We will add these to our SCDRP web pages and put them in our next digital newsletter. So this concludes our April monthly partnership meeting. A very special thank you again to our esteemed panelists, Brian Byfield, Adam Stein, Mary Roderick, and Drew Christy. And thank you for joining us today, for coming together today for this kind of regional knowledge sharing. We will meet again next after Memorial Day on Thursday, May 29th. Have a great day, everyone.